Kelly Starrett, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, man. I'm stoked to be here. I
Well,
mean, I can't wait to tell you about my knife fetish. I mean, the whole thing.
well, I'm stoked to have you because I'm a big fan of your work. Supple Leopard. It's helped me out a lot. But before we get to you got a new book out, Deskbound, Standing Up to a Sitting World, which I love because we've written a lot about the perils of sitting and what it can do to your body and how to undo the damage of sitting. But before we get to the book, let's talk about your career for those who aren't familiar with you. How did you become this this mobility guru that athletes go to? We're talking NFL, Major League Baseball players. How did this happen?
I am very uncomfortable with the word guru,
I know, but yeah, and it's the word.
but I will say level 10 dance master.
Level 10 dance master. All right.
Well, I had a serious career as in synchronized swimming. People don't really know. I was an athlete. I was a broken athlete. I discovered, I've always been obsessed with pattern recognition. And I think that if I was an X-Men, pattern recognition would be my skill. Like I can, see large data sets or see patterns and just pick them up, right? I get the big gestalt piece fast. And that really worked for me when I was an athlete. It worked for me when I was a young physio. And when I was in the first semester of physio school, I discovered CrossFit, which was really a profound experience in terms of a crash course. I mean, I was on the national team. I was a national champion. I had paddled in world championships, and literally, I couldn't do a handstand well. My front squatting was dubious at best. And what CrossFit really did was force me to confront the fact that I wasn't as physically literate as I thought I was. And I'm not just talking about metabolically literate, like, can I outsuffer everyone? Because the world has changed in the last 10 years. People are working harder than we did 10 years ago, unequivocally. But I just wasn't as fluent in things that look like gymnastics or Olympic lifting. And intrinsically, I knew I knew that I needed to seek these things out. I mean, I remember having a serious conversation with my mom where I was like, Mom, she was a single parent. I'm a single child. And I was like, Mom, how come I wasn't in ballet? Like, did you not love me? And she was like, I tried, but we were so poor and I couldn't get you in ballet where we were. And I remember being like, she was kind of like, I was trying to be a good mom. And I was like, Mom, I'm just kind of kidding, kind of. But you really you screwed me. I wasn't in ballet or gymnastics. Like I was supposed to pick this stuff up, automatically. And sort of that's how we got here, because if you were lucky enough to be in a movement tradition, martial arts, gymnastics, dance, maybe you had some formalized training on what your spine is supposed to do and how you maintain your spinal position and jump and land. And I didn't get any of that. And what we have been saying to kids and adults and humans is that as long as your life is sufficiently diversified, you'll be able to cultivate these skills. Right. And that's what we tell kids, and parents, have your kids play lots of sports. And we're like, we're not sure why that works, but just lots of sports is better. And if you're lucky enough to have some serious movement training in one of those sports, maybe it helps. But most of us just played sports and worked harder. And then all of a sudden something goes wrong with us, or we realize that we're not as fit as we were, or we do the Spartan race and fall on our faces, or, we can't deadlift or hip hinge, or, we tear an Achilles playing basketball. And it's because our movement practice, the things that we were doing to get ready for playing sports, wasn't sufficient. What we did was we were substituting playing sports for a movement practice. And if you were lucky enough to stumbled into yoga or Pilates, man, you were nailing it early. But I didn't. I was like, yoga and Pilates, who's got time for yoga and Pilates? I'm gonna go ride my bike and go crush this river and maybe lift some weights, on the Cybex machine, And, so we got here. We opened a gym, 13 years ago, was when we started our gym. And pretty soon we start to see the same patterns over and over again. Like, why is that foot turning out when you're squatting? Why can't you get into a pistol position? Hey, I noticed that you're slouching all day at work, probably because you're at work. And now you can't put your arms over your head effectively. And that we were able to sort of derive cause and effect, and then go from effect back to cause, because we could see it in people's movement practices. And because the model that we were using, CrossFit, was really predicated on making sure that people could do a handstand and push up and pull up. They had the fundamentals of these human positions, these archetypal shapes that I talk about. And it became very clear that our movement practices weren't getting us there. unless you were, again, in some kind of formal movement training. If you grew up in China, part of the National China Development Program for Olympic lifting, you move pretty well. The rest of us sort of cobble it together. And what ends up happening then is that it puts us into a really interesting dynamic later on, because when we're young, we can buffer a lot of mechanical silliness. But then all of a sudden, things start to break down, or we start to become impinged, or we have these flare-ups that really pull us out of our roles as physical beings. And we're left sort of wandering. And then you go into this sports medicine hole, and it's a sports medicine rabbit hole. This for-profit sports medicine thing it basically is predicated on the idea. And look, there are really talented physicians out there and physios and chiros, but the whole thing is predicated on the idea that everyone is going to break. Let's just wait around until they break. And that's nonsense. And, because some people don't break, and some people, what we saw was that the same language we were using to improve the performance of our elite athletes and moms and dads, and we get to go behind the scenes of every professional sport, every military unit. I mean, we see everyone's dirty laundry. Those techniques to improve performance were the same techniques we were using to ameliorate mechanical dysfunction and pain. And that's where we're able to really derive some consilience, to really understand some of the processes and positions underneath this. So, if your knee hurts after a run, you're not injured. That's called an incident. And you should have a plan to be able to deal with that. And part of, I think, what the revolution of where we are right now as humans is that we are handing more responsibility back to the person, back to the athlete. And this is completely in line with the art of manliness, let's be totally honest, because what we're saying is, that quote by Robert Heinlein, a man should be able to change a diaper, plan an aria, set a bone,
Right.
And that's what we need. We need to become generalists again. And we have become hyper specialists. What do? I work on the social interface analog for this internet startup. I mean, you are an expert in your job, but it turns out you don't know how to cook a steak or deal with your knee pain. And that's what we're trying to do, is let's just take all this low-hanging fruit off the table.
Right. So you guys are basically helping people reconnect themselves with their body, or even just making the introduction in the first place. Because the one thing I've noticed when I started working on mobility and movement, really focusing how disconnected my brain is from my body. When you have to go through these sequences of okay, activate your glutes, or rotate your knees, or put your shoulders in my brain is I don't know how to do that. It has this brain fart because I never practiced that. So I had to really work hard to develop that skill.
Well, and it's okay to make this about skill. And that's the thing that I think there's two things in there that really make people uncomfortable. It makes the medical professionals, the for-profit rehab sports medicine specialists uncomfortable, because I'm saying, hey, look, none of this is skilled. Let's get it out of behind this paywall and put it into the hands of people. You know why? Because they're sophisticated enough to figure out what's going to work and not going to work. And the injury risk is very, very low. And the injury risk is higher if they just go out and run like jerks, with missing hip extension and no ankle range and their calves are stiff, right? I mean, come on.
Right.
But, the idea here is that we have decoupled skill from training, skill from exercise. And the highest expression of that is go to, a soul cycle class, and you are going to die. You're going to suffer through the eyes. I mean, you're going to melt. Go jump into some boot camp where you just do 1 million burpees, and you can work really hard and not be skilled, not jump and land in a good position. Collapse your ankle, overextend your back every single time. And the problem is, there's not this immediate kickback that you're in a bad position. It doesn't express itself for months or maybe years, or until you're under stress, until you're under threat, and then you'll default to your lowest base, most practiced pattern. And that's what's really interesting here, is that, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And we have somehow, taken all of the practice out of the physicality of being human. And if you work with a Japanese swordman or a Russian tennis instructor, man, you're going to do these same drills over and over and over until you just get it down, right? We say practice is, it's the currency of adult education. Repetition is the mother of learning, and we can expand those definitions and say, hey, look, why don't you be skilled? And clearly there's a degree. You don't have to pick up your child the same way you're deadlifting 500 pounds, but the principles are the same. And the failure to see the unification in those movements and to apply the same sets of principles is nonsense. You wouldn't just walk up to 500 pounds and just like grip it and rip it. And yet that's what we do when we pick up our kid. And then we're like, one day you sneeze and you're like, oh, my back, and you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like you just sneezed, like this is, we've gotten really far away from the robust sense of self. And we don't have to be perfect. We just have to work towards perfect.
Gotcha. All right. So let's talk about Deskbound. It's about sitting, how it's terrible for us, right? And I guess this is probably one of the biggest source of the problems that you see with your clients is that, and everyone, whether they're an athlete or a stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home dad or whatever, is like sitting just jacks everything up. So why, walk us through the details. Why is sitting so terrible for us?
Well, how about this? It's not that sitting is terrible for you. It has its problems. Look at jump into a ballet class, jump into a Pilates class, jump into a yoga class, come lift some weights with me, and then look at the same spinal shapes across all of those, right? Now, let's just go into any office or any classroom, and let's look at the spinal shapes. And tell me that you're okay with that rounded, sitting on your sacrum, shoulders forward, neck cranked back, and you're going to be there for 12 to 14 hours a day. No big deal, right? Totally. Week after week after week. And then all of a sudden, you wake up one day and you're like, wow, I have shoulder pain or neck pain, or back pain, or I got slow, or, why is that guy kicking my butt? Or, just choose a stinking problem. The adult diaper industry is a $1.2 billion problem in the United States. We have an athlete at our gym who was a high-level gymnast. And she's had a couple kids, and when she double unders or jump ropes, with her pelvis spilled forward, an anterior pelvic tilt, like her pelvic bowl is like tipping forward. When she does that, she pees herself. You can just see pee come right out, right? And when she's in a good position, the same position we talk about when we're deadlifting, running, jumping, right? All the athletic shape, the base position, sitting, Tadasana, all that stuff, right? All these movement traditions that have arrived at the same spinal shape, nothing happens. She doesn't pee herself. And imagine if we had that feedback, because the problem is we're leveraging the fact that it's German engineering. This machine has evolved for 2.5 million years. It is a pretty stinking robust machine. You can lose a lung. Don't worry, you can still climb Everest. How do we know? Because there's a guy with one lung who climbed Everest. I don't think we sort of confuse this robustness with the fact that, anything I do, my body will tolerate. And that's not the case. And so when we pan back, because we don't have this immediate feedback loop, when we pan back and start to take a big picture, we can start to have this thing called induction, which is where we see lots of information, right? The heart of the scientific processes of induction. And what we're seeing is in the United States, there are now more obese Americans than non-obese Americans. That in the last 10 years, diabetes has gone up 400%. That the study that came out 2 years ago, or just like 2 weeks ago, says that for the first time, or not for the first time, but we have not stopped the avalanche of childhood obesity in America. ACL rates in women still up 6 to 8 times the rate of men. Kids tearing their ACLs at literally 400% increase over 10 years ago. Your children run a mile 1 minute and 20 seconds slower than you do. Choose something that matters to you, right? I want to burn more calories. A big piece of research that came out that said that at a call center, people who stood were 45% more productive. That means they closed 45% more business. It turns out then, when we kind of go back in, that we ask the fundamental question, that one thing we started with: what does it mean to be a human being? And what does that mean? And what it means is that I'm not ever supposed to be sedentary. That's not how the human physiology was evolved. And so you're like, well, I'm not sedentary. I exercise. I'm like, well, do you sit more than 6 hours a day? Because by definition, you're a sedentary person. And so that we have is this tug of war between being sedentary and non-sedentary, right? Or sedentary, and it's like smoking and jogging. I'm an elite athlete. Here, pass me the little chocolate donuts. And what you're seeing is that we negate a lot of the good effects, and it's about first principles. If you can eat like a ninja, you can train hard, but if you don't sleep, I guarantee you're going to fall apart. And it turns out that putting more movement in and avoiding positions that just challenge your soft tissues without any activation, right? We want to use your musculature. About 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, we We gave all the guys who worked in warehouses, we gave them belts. Remember that phenomenon?
Right. Yeah. You still see them on at Home Depot.
Yeah, but they don't wear them, right? They just wear them. They turn them on and turn them off, right? Oh, lifting something heavy. But for a while, they just put them on like it was no one's business, because everyone's like, "This is great. It's like having an extra spine." Well, we know that anything that gets habitually braced over the long haul becomes what we call, and this is a technical term in jargon, weak. You become weak sauce. And so what happened was the injury rates of spines in warehouse workers went through the roof. Why? They didn't ever use their spines. They used the belt as a set of spines, as a set of musculature and soft tissues. Well, the same thing happens when you sit down in a chair. You literally, your trunk turns off, and what you end up using is the chair, or you use the end range of your soft tissues. It's like, standing there hyperextending your knee. You can do it, but over the long haul, that's going to cause you some grief. And that's really ultimately the problem with sitting, is that we're not moving, and that those sitting positions cause us problems when we go stand up. And if you are just going to go from the chair to the elliptical machine to the exercise bike, you might not ever notice that your hips don't actually work like hips anymore. And that may be okay with you. If you're never going to squat down on the ground, then that may be okay with you. But it turns out that, again, when we look at the greater picture, there was a good piece of research that came out that correlated your ability to get up and down off the ground. Remember that? You saw it on Dr. Oz?
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, that correlates to early mortality. Well, it turns out if you don't have the hip range of motion or the strength to get up and down off the ground, you're more likely to fall. And if I have you squat down right now, put your feet together, squat all the way to the ground, your heels should stay on the ground, and that should be an effortless position. Like I'm up on my stool, and I'm doing it now as I talk to you. And I can sit in this position because this would be the position I would take a poo in the woods, or I'd make a campfire, right? These are the fundamental end ranges of the hip and the ankle. But because we don't necessarily expose ourselves to some of these end range positions regularly, we don't know that they go away or become stiff until it's too late. And all of a sudden now we can just see that, hey, there's this gigantic adaptation error going on in our day-to-day lives, and that's called sitting too much. And the leading researcher in obesity is James Levine from the Mayo Clinic, he's the guy who coined sitting is the new smoking. And he says you really should limit your sitting to 2 hours a day. That's how toxic it is.
That's crazy. So yeah, there's a lot going on there with sitting. So your metabolism slows down dramatically, basically shuts off.
It basically shuts off. Your body's like, we're not burning fats. It's all good.
Right. And then you're putting yourself in these positions because you're probably sitting incorrectly, so that you're relying more on soft tissue. Like
you're just one of my friends calls it hanging on the meat. He's a Navy SEAL. He's like, you mean I'm just hanging on the meat? I was like, exactly. You're hanging on the meat. Don't hang on your meat.
And so this is going to cause tightness in your hips, your glutes, and then what's amazing that it not only affects your lower half, but it goes upstream as well. It affects tightness in the shoulders, your chest, and that causes a problem. If you're working out, you want to do a shoulder press, you might not be able to do it because you're so stinking tight.
Might not. I guarantee you won't, because your T-spine is too tight, and it affects all these things. Your ability to breathe. When you sit down and fold forward, you're going to breathe up in your neck. You're not going to breathe in diaphragm, and your whole rib cage, pelvis, trunk system really becomes, you compromise your pelvic floor and you compromise your diaphragm function. So we've just taken that beautiful ventilation machine, right, and we just bent the the framework that holds the ventilation mechanism, and guess what you end up with? Really crappy VO2 max. So if your sport is running or biking, man, good luck. We just smoked you.
Right, and that shallow breathing too, like you said in the book, it induces the fight or flight response. You're not, totally. It stresses you out.
And all you have to do is go to that TED talk where that guy talks about posture and testosterone, and then your brain is wired for these positions and movements. It knows that these slouch rounded behaviors are like, I'm cowering, and it's like that thing when you smile. When you're feeling pissed off, eventually you're like, you know what? I'm pissed off, but I kind of feel happy and pissed off. And it's because your brain recognizes the smile as associated with these shapes and positions. And the fact that we can't draw these connections for people, where we're not doing a good enough job, we're going to become that guy in Wall-E who just float around. We just are really removing our humanity. And what we've seen is sort of the ongoing creep. Because I know what you're saying. I was born in the 70s. I sat, it was fine. But you also walked to school both ways in the snow, uphill. You didn't watch that much TV because there's only 3 channels. You either watched Gilligan's Island, right? Or you watched, MASH with your parents. And there was just nothing, a flipper. There wasn't much on, and there wasn't a screen. And the screen is this sort of insidious load on us. So what we're seeing is that the Kaiser Family Foundation did a study that looked at kids from across all socioeconomic cohorts, and kids from age 8 to 18 were spending an average of 7.5 hours a day in front of a screen. And so what we can say definitively is, hey, technology is not going away. So what are we going to do instead? Well, instead of making our bodies conform to the environment, let's go ahead and make the environment fit the bodies. I mean, that's why we have a stinking opposable thumb in the first place. That cortex allowed us to shape our environment, and we can just expand that definition a little further and say, hey, look, let's adopt positions and shapes that our body should be in. Our kids are at the first all-standing school in the world. And let me tell you how many problems we have with that. 0. No one complains. No one kvetches. Right? The research shows that you can actually reverse childhood obesity by standing. How about that? Right? I mean, just choose something that matters to you. Our project, standupkids.org, to date, we have over 27,000 kids in the U.S. standing now. Most of those kids are in poverty school areas, right? And what we're our nonprofit was just curated by the Obama administration and kind of chosen as the Just Move. That's Michelle Obama's childhood obesity platform. What we see is that this is a really simple intervention, and anyone who's standing in the way of this, is a part of the problem. Like, they are part of the chair industrial complex. And you should see the kickback I get from some physical therapists, for example. They're like, there's no proof. And I'm like, it's because you are an ass and are part of the problem. And I'm just going to hand off the diabetes bills to you guys. This is such a solvable problem that it's been staring us in the face, and it's just so easy. You don't need a doctor's note to stand up and be human again. You need an Amazon box to put your computer on.
Right, and that's it. So your solution is just, instead of sitting all the time, even if you're in an office or at home, is just stand up, move more, right? And so you can utilize certain tools like a standing desk, for example.
Yeah, and our kids can sit down on the ground anytime they want at school, which is a fine place. It turns out that cultures that toilet on the ground, sleep on the ground, they don't fall. Their fall risk on their elderly drops to 0.
Right. You talk about in the book, in Japan, like in the nursing homes, the old people sleep on the floor, and they can get up and go to the bathroom by themselves, take care of themselves because they have to get up off the floor.
And their hip disease and lumbar disease also drops to 0.
Right.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It's use it or lose it. It's look, some of our fancy physician friends say this. They're like, look, you're designed to be 110 years old. I mean, you're going to outlive your gonads. That's the real problem. We outlive our gonads, but we can fix that now. And, but what we're seeing is, we have to ask this thing, the first idea is, are we moving enough? Good. Now we're moving. Great. Now let's have the next conversation. Let's move well, and that means that we don't have to be perfect, but this is a practice that we can work towards for the rest of our life. It turns out that you never become too skilled. It turns out that, you can continue to practice and develop a practice around your movement efficiency the rest of your life. And this is the heart and soul of the matter. So,
I mean, let's talk about transitioning from sitting to standing. Because I imagine it's not something you want to is it something you can do just the next day?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. You don't have to work your way into it.
Yeah. You should just get a pack of cigarettes and smoke the whole one. Let's go.
Right. Yeah. Great.
Hey, we're running a marathon. Great. This afternoon. Fine. It'll be fine.
Right.
No, you need to, look, what does it say about you that you have a hard time being upright all day? What does that say about you?
You're weak.
And you maybe have some handbrakes on the system.
Yeah.
Why? Because you were part of someone's system. You came from somewhere. This isn't a value statement about your abilities. This is, hey, you were forced to sit as a kid too. And, I just did an interview with a newspaper, and the guy's like, hey, one of the guys in my office blew out his back standing. And I was like, wow, that guy, was he like Mr. Glass in that movie, with Bruce Willis? I mean, he sneezes and he fractures. I mean, something is really wrong if you are standing and moving and it hurts you, and you have to go lay down. But with that being said, we find that we should probably put ourselves on a shaping gradient. Stand for just an hour at your desk this week. If that felt good, up it to 2 hours. Hang out there for a couple weeks. And what you'll find is that pretty soon it's automatic to stand. And here's another idea, right? It's okay to sit down and take a break. That's totally okay. No one's going to judge you. The other thing is, if you've ever been to a bar, there are these places called pubs where you can get alcohol served to you. It's amazing. And you'll notice that there's a rail at the bottom of the bar. Well, the bartenders figured out that you made things the right height so people could lean and keep their torso upright. You gave them a place to put their foot so they could swing, or they prop their foot up, the Captain Morgan pose, and all of a sudden you could take all the loads out of your spine and you could stand all day long. Nice.
So yeah, you're not just standing there. You're actually encouraging dynamic movement. Like, so while you're standing, do some other stuff as well.
Well, since I'm standing during this talk, and
I am too.
I have changed my position 30 times, right? It's called fidgeting. And, fidgeting is your brain actually being connected to your body and recognizing your body's like, hey, you need to change your shape. And so you just change your shape. And it's an automatic process. But when you sit down, you go from kind of compromised shape to slouch to other slouch. You don't breathe well. You're just not ventilating. I mean, it's a disaster. But as soon as you create this standing environment, we get what we call a movement-rich environment. And that gives us movement options. And, I love having a stool. Not that I sit on the stool, but sometimes I lean against a stool. But I use the stool as a platform. I mean, we have some stools like Amazon for like $8. And I put my foot on it, in a high lunge. I'll lay across it in like pigeon pose. You know what I mean? I try to keep noodling around. And one of the things that we find is that the stiffer you are and the more poorly you move, the more time you have to restore your positions and tissues. And the more efficient you are and the more you move, the less actual, mobilization work that you actually have to do. And that's nice. What it means is that I'm always kind of working on my positions and shapes. I got a ball at the desk and I can roll out my feet. And, it means that when I answer emails, I collect 10 minutes in the bottom position of my squat. Like the end of your martial arts, where the coach is, the instructor sensei is talking to you and you're kneeling. That's an important position for your knees and your ankles. And that can be a position where you're just, watching TV or answering your emails or talking on the phone. And so we can backload so much of the movement and so much of the improvement of the movement into our day-to-day lives, so that when we get home or we're off work or we're done training, we have actual time to like free associate and hang out and read. And I don't have to be layering in an hour of undoing the mess that I got in during the day.
Right. So put it throughout the day. And I mean, what's the response for people who think, oh man, if I'm standing while I'm working, I can't focus or concentrate. Is there anything to that, or can you actually concentrate better when you're standing?
Well, it turns out that if you look at all the functional MRIs of people sitting, their brains actually turn off. And the research is showing that kids who take the SATs score on average about 200 points, higher. So I think that's bullshit. I'm calling bullshit on that. And when you ask all the kids at school, right? And I know it's not hard science, but there is hard science around it. Out of Texas A&M, done by Mark Bendon, who says that kids, the engagement in classrooms is up like 12%, 14% over the course of a day, which aggregates into a lot of time. And when we ask all our kids, because a lot of our kids have been standing now for 2 years. They're like, oh, I would never go back. I can't, they work standing up, they do homework standing up, they test standing up. It's remarkable.
That's awesome.
I think, what's confusing is if you ever tried a treadmill desk.
Yeah, I've got one.
I am personally not a fan because it doesn't scale.
Yeah.
But also sometimes you have to walk so slowly, it's hard to focus for a while. But I'm like caveat emptor. I mean, like, I want you to move, and if that makes you feel like you can move better, I'm down with it. We have our favorite thing is this thing called a fidget bar, and all of our kids' desks have a bar that swings underneath there. It's like a Skinner bar. I mean, they get up top, and then their foot swings back and forth on a little pendulum. And we actually made one on Rogue Fitness. So I'm not trying to sell it, but the idea is you can just be swinging away and get all that small motion in. And it's automatically programmed, because it's the bottom of your desk. You put your foot up and you swing. And that's the same thing we were getting on an anti-fatigue mat or doing a little walking. It's just, initially, because it's a new pattern, it may take you a while. But just, one of my coaches, Carl Pally, says, hey, just because it's harder doesn't mean it's not, better. And, what we're pointing out is it's okay that it took you a while. It shouldn't necessarily be automatic. But,
Mm-hmm.
it is better for you in the long haul.
Right. You know what's interesting is that, it's people think like this is like something new, but there's like people a long time ago kind of discovered this stuff intuitively. This is kind of something that people don't know about Teddy Roosevelt. I'm a big fan of Teddy Roosevelt. If you've read the site, you know that. But the guy, ever since he was a little kid, whenever he would read oftentimes standing, but he would like put his foot up by his knee, so he looked like a crane. So he's like standing on one foot, and he would just like sit there, and then he would switch and like go to the other leg. And that was kind of his way of being able to stand for long periods of time.
Yeah, that's kind of like stork pose or something.
Right, it was a stork pose. He looked like a stork. I mean, that's how he described it.
And that's what you're doing is when you take the second leg out, you're basically getting out of extension, and you're taking the extension load out of your back. And that's why when you see people standing around, our athletic stance, we say make your combat stance your everyday stance. But like you should stand on both feet with your feet underneath your lungs. And what you'll see is that people's feet are pointed in different directions. They've cocked one hip out. They're overextended. They're standing in like weird middle splits. They're standing in the, oh, no, you didn't position. And what you're seeing is that they are trying to solve a mechanical problem and dumping into these wretched shapes. And that single post, if Teddy Roosevelt had a place to put his foot, he did. He had a place to put his foot. It was his other leg. He did the same thing as the Captain Morgan pose.
Right.
And you're right. A lot of well-known people worked and functioned upright. From Eames to
Hemingway.
I mean, a lot of people just turns out Winston Churchill focused better. If you're really looking for allegory, take a bullet to the chest, go back out and make another speech. Maybe standing is, go conquer a river in Amazon. Right. And then, maybe that is, you should be like, what is that guy doing? Oh, he's standing.
All right. So when you do sit, how should we sit? And I got a question here. There's a question too about ergonomic chairs. That's like really big in office world. I got it at one of those Aeron chairs, but like lately it's been, I don't know, just like it hurts my back whenever I sit in it. So, what's the best chair we should get? How should we sit when we do sit down?
Sure. Well, here's the deal. Divide all your potential sitting into optional and non-optional sitting. So here's an example. Chevron, recognized, and this is consistent with the research, and we say it in the book, but the highest number, the cohort of people who have the highest number of musculoskeletal injuries are the office workers. Office workers have more musculoskeletal injuries than any other group of people workers. You can be like a dynamite juggler. You're safer than an office worker. And the guys at Chevron the men and women at Chevron figured out that they would start locking out the computers every 55 minutes. And then that forced everyone to get up and walk around. So they felt like that was a simple compromise. But during their actual meetings, because remember, they've invested in all this infrastructure, right? Their conference rooms, they're not just going to take that out. So during the conference meeting, a little gong goes off every 20 minutes and people keep talking and they stand up during the gong because the gong goes gong. They keep talking and they all kind of stretch and they move around a little and then they sit back down. And so immediately what you've done is that you've built in this notion that, hey, if I'm going to sit and I have to sit, then every 20 minutes or so, get up and move around for 2 minutes. So 20 minutes, move 2 minutes. Just walk around, squeeze your butt, put your arms over your head, breathe a little bit. That has to be non-specific. Just, we need you to move. That'll help. Second is, if you can make the choice to stand. And when we say stand, what we're really saying is move, right? So if you have a choice of moving instead of just sitting, like on the bus or walking or, there's just so many options where you can be in the back. Like last night, my oldest daughter plays the cello and I'm in a middle school, elementary school, orchestra concert. And it's an hour and a half. And I just didn't sit in one of those little chairs because what those little chairs are designed for? They're designed to be stacked by the janitorial staff. It has zero input into my ergonomics or my size. And so I can either compress myself or I just stood in the back and then I sat down cross-legged and then I stood some more. And I can make little choices like that because it feels better to my body. The other thing is that, as you pointed out, that Aeron chair, that material was designed to help people with bed sores. So it was designed for people with wheelchairs so we could get more circulation so the tissues didn't break down. That should tell you a lot about the robustness of the chair. The chair you're designing, the material was so that people in wheelchairs wouldn't die of compression ulcers and tissue ulcers. Like that's how serious sitting is, right? If you're in a wheelchair, it's a real problem. And one of the issues is that, hey, we put in all of this support in the back. It's ergonomic. Well, remember, When you see support, you should think to yourself, I'm becoming weaker. The structure is doing it for me. And so one of the things that happens is that people sit back and once again, you just turn your trunk musculature off. You don't support even the systems that make it more efficient for you to breathe. And then in order to actually work, you can't lean back. You have to lean forward away from the back. So now you're slouched, right? You're sitting on your femurs. These are the the backs of your hamstrings are non-weight bearing surfaces. You may have noticed. Otherwise, they would look like the butts of like gibbons. It'd be like the balls of your feet and the palms of your hands. You do have weight bearing surfaces in your hips. Those are your ischial tuberosities, or what people call your sit bones. And so if you're going to sit at the edge of the chair, right? Find those sit bones, find those ischial tuberosities, your pelvis. That's not your femurs. Your femurs will be dangling off. And then sit up, make your trunk work. And what you'll find is automatically you're going to be feeling better and fidgeting more. And that's going to be an automatic better shape.
All right. So ditch the Aeron chair, get a stool.
Well, and a stool would be great. And you may need a little pad. Like, I'm not expecting you to be some kind of, monk from the turn of the century.
This is the art of manliness here. Of course I'm going to do that. I'm a masochist.
Right. I think, or you could, all our stools, I'm not going to say that we're manly or womanly around here, but we don't have pads on our stools. But remember that if you're forced to sit for long periods of time, it's okay to put a pad in there, right? Because that allows us to actually move a little bit more efficiently and see less compression. So like my fighter pilots, there'll be a little pad in the chair, the fighter pilots, right? When I flew with the Blue Angels, because I work with those pilots, and there's a little thin pad, just a little piece of foam that really takes the edge off that seat at 7 Gs.
Gotcha. Well, hey, Kelly, this has been a great conversation. We haven't even gotten into the maintenance, but we can send people to your site where they can find out about information about that, because you got a lot of great videos and content out there. So,
yeah, and the back of Deskbound, we really tried to strip it down and say, hey, here are the basics. This is what we think every human being, every mom and dad should know. And we gave you some basic routines. Take a crack at fixing yourself before you call. Can you check your oil in your car, or do you have to call the doctor to check the oil in your car? That's what we're talking about.
Gotcha. Well, hey, Kelly, where can people learn more about the book and your work?
You can get Deskbound on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. We're really proud of this. We're having great conversations with like governments about the implications and the social change. And then, we're at MobilityWod, and which is WOD, workout of the day. And then the real issue is where we should direct people is standupkids.org, because you know a child, you know someone who has a child, and all we're doing is the model. We've partnered with Donors Choose, and our models are flipping one classroom at a time. And in 10 years, we'll get everyone.
That's awesome. Well, Kelly Starrett, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Brett, thank you.
My guest today was Kelly Starrett. He is the author of Deskbound. You can find that on Amazon.com and bookstores everywhere. And also make sure to check out Kelly's website at MobilityWod.com. And for show notes for this podcast, go to aom.is/standup.